The theater's backstage corridors were a labyrinth of secrets after midnight. Gas lamps flickered weakly, casting elongated shadows across ropes, pulleys, and abandoned props. Sherlin Holmes moved with predatory silence, his lantern slicing through the gloom. Martin trailed behind, clutching a ledger purloined from the director's office. Helena owed thousands to creditors, he whispered. Pawnbrokers, tailors, even a pawned emerald necklace. Holmes paused at a rack of costumes, his fingers brushing a gown spattered with fake blood. Debt is a motive for murder, he said, but this killer sought more than money. They wanted her humiliated. They found Tomas Rivera in the prop room, polishing a dagger with furious strokes. The stagehand stiffened at their entrance. Holmes held up the Lily's torn card. Turpentine. You reek of it. Tomas's jaw tightened. I paint sets. So what? Martin flipped through the ledger. Helena owed you 3 months' wages. You threatened her last week. Tomas threw the rag down. I warned her, but I didn't kill her. Check the understudy's dressing room if you want answers. Viola Croft's quarters were sparse, lit by a single cracked mirror. Holmes sifted through playbills annotated with frantic notes. Louder on the soliloquy, hold the pause. And a miniature portrait of a young Viola with a woman whose face had been scratched out. Martin lifted a vial of almond oil from the dressing table. Prussic acids distilled from bitter almonds. This could be residue. Holmes pocketed it, his attention snagging on a playbill for The Orphan's Lament, a decade-old production starring Helena. Viola's name appeared in tiny print, Child Extra. They reconvened in Helena's dressing room, a shrine to vanity. Gowns dripped from every hook. Love letters filled a rosewood desk. Holmes pried open a hidden drawer, revealing a faded birth certificate. Viola Croft, born Helena Margaret Voss, he read. Father. Unknown. Martin inhaled sharply. She had a child? But Viola's her. A floorboard creaked. Holmes whirled, but the corridor was empty. At dawn, they cornered Nigel Thorne in the empty auditorium. The director paced the stage, clutching a flask. Helena's debts endangered the theater, he admitted. But I would never harm her. She was irreplaceable. His gaze drifted to Viola, who swept ashes from the orchestra pit. Holmes followed his line of sight. You knew about Viola's lineage, he pressed. Thorne paled. Helena made me swear silence. She paid a family to raise the girl, but Viola tracked her down last year, demanded a role here. Helena felt guilty. Guilt, Holmes knew, was a weak motive for murder. But resentment? That festered. He examined the birth certificate again. The attending physician's name, Dr. Elias Quinn, stirred a memory. Quinn had been implicated in a blackmail scheme years prior, selling secrets of London's elite. Helena's secret, perhaps, had been commoditized. As they departed, a stagehand delivered a note to Holmes. Meet me at the Blackfriars Bridge. I know who killed her. It was unsigned, but the paper bore the same turpentine scent. Blackfriars Bridge loomed like a skeletal hand over the Thames, its iron arches swallowed by a fog thick enough to clot the lungs. Sherlin Holmes stood at its midpoint, the note's turpentine scent still clinging to his gloves. Martin shivered beside him, collar turned up against the damp. This reeks of a trap, he muttered. Holmes said nothing, his gaze fixed on the shadowy figure approaching them, a hunched woman in a moth-eaten shawl, her face obscured by a veil. You're late, the woman rasped, her voice graveled by age or artifice. She thrust a parcel into Holmes' hands. Inside lay a stack of letters, their seals broken. Holmes tilted one toward the dim gaslight. My dearest Elias, Helena's florid script began. The child must never know. Arrange the adoption, and I'll triple your fee. Martin leaned in. Elias, Dr. Quinn? The woman hissed a laugh. Quinn sold secrets till the day he died. These were in his attic. She vanished into the fog before they could question her further. Back at Baker Street, Holmes spread the letters across his desk. They chronicled Helena's desperation, payments to Quinn, pleas to erase Viola's existence, and a final furious missive dated weeks before her death. "You'll expose her, won't you?" Helena had written. "Even now, you'd punish me for wanting the stage over a cradle." Martin frowned. Viola discovered the truth. But why kill Helena now? Holmes tapped a letter, mentioning a benefactor funding Viola's theater training. Someone stoked her resentment. A puppeteer in the wings. They found Dr. Quinn's former surgery in Spitalfields, a crumbling townhouse reeking of mildew. Inside, filing cabinets gaped like gutted carcasses. Holmes unearthed a ledger detailing Quinn's blackmail victims, aristocrats, politicians, Helena. A recent entry listed a withdrawal of £500 to a V. Croft. Viola paid Quinn for her own adoption records, Holmes deduced. But where'd she get the money? Martin leafed through invoices. A cash deposit from the Théâtre Lumineux, Nigel Thorne's competitor. The revelation hung between them. Thorne's rival theater had motive to sabotage Helena's production. Had Viola been manipulated into matricide to further a competitor's scheme? Holmes' jaw tightened. The poison was personal, but the funding, that's greed. Two motives, entwined. They returned to the theater at dusk, catching Viola rehearsing alone on stage. Her performance as Marie Antoinette was flawless, her voice trembling with a grief that felt too raw for mimicry. Holmes waited in the shadows until she noticed him. "You know," she said, not turning around. "I used to watch her from the rafters. She never once looked up." Holmes stepped into the light. "Quinn sold you your birthright. Who paid you to kill her?" Viola's composure cracked. "I didn't want her dead. I wanted her to see me, to regret." She faltered as Thorne emerged from the wings, clutching a bank draft stamped with the Théâtre Lumineux seal. "Enough, Viola," he said wearily. "The detectives, too clever by half." Holmes advanced. "You funded her revenge. Eliminate Helena, inherit her star, and secure a lucrative transfer for yourself." Thorne's smile was thin. "Art requires sacrifice." But Holmes shook his head. "You miscalculated. Viola's hatred was your tool, but she chose the poison. A daughter's plea for acknowledgement." He turned to Viola, whose tears streaked her stage makeup. The prop glass was a message. "See me. Remember me." As Martin restrained Thorne, Holmes studied Viola. Her hands, still clutching the vial of almond oil, trembled not with guilt, but with the anguish of a child forever curtained by her mother's shadow. The Théâtre Lumineux rose like a gilded tombstone in the heart of Covent Garden, its marble facade choked by ivy. Sherlyn Holmes lingered across the street, watching carriages disgorge silk-clad patrons. "A rival with deeper pockets," Martin remarked, squinting at the playbill for The Duchess's Folly, a production starring none other than Clara Devereux, Helena Voss' fiercest competitor. Holmes adjusted his hat. "And perhaps a puppeteer who profits from tragedy." Inside, the theater was a mirror of opulence and decay. Crystal chandeliers dripped light onto frayed carpets, and the air tasted of dust and ambition. Holmes sought out the owner, Silas Manderley, a barrel-chested impresario with a reputation for crushing competitors. They found him in his private box, sipping brandy as actors rehearsed below. "Ah, the detective who fancies himself a critic," Manderley drawled. "Come to review my latest triumph?" Holmes placed the bank draft stamped with the Théâtre Lumineux seal on the velvet railing. You paid Nigel Thorne to sabotage Helena's production. Why? Manderley's joviality evaporated. Thorne was drowning in debt. A man in his position trades secrets for survival. He leaned closer, his breath sour. But funding an understudy's vendetta? That's poetry. Helena's bastard child killing her? The scandal alone would have filled my seats for months. Martin bristled. You manipulated Viola into murder. Manderley smirked. I merely watered the seed of resentment. Thorne handled the rest. Holmes' voice sharpened. And Thorne's sudden conscience? His arrest? Manderley waved a dismissive hand. Actors are replaceable. Directors, too. Before Holmes could press further, a scream fractured the air. Below, Clara Devereux writhed on stage, clawing at her throat. The cast scattered as Holmes vaulted over the box's edge, landing with a dancer's precision. Clara's glass of prop sherry rolled from her hand, its contents foaming faintly. Holmes sniffed it. Prussic acid. The same method. Martin knelt beside Clara, who gasped, "The flowers!" Her trembling finger pointed to a bouquet of lilies at the footlights. Holmes tore open the card. For the next queen. The paper reeked of turpentine. Manderley barged backstage, face purple with rage. "This is your doing," he spat at Holmes. "You have cursed my theater." Holmes ignored him, interrogating the stage manager, a gaunt woman named Beatrice. Who delivered the flowers? Beatrice stammered, "A boy. Paid in advance. He smelled of paint. Turpentine. Tomas Rivera's scent. They found Tomas in a Clerkenwell garret, its walls slathered with half-finished canvases. He hurled a paintbrush at them. "I didn't touch Clara." Holmes blocked the door. "But you sent the lilies, and the note at Blackfriars Bridge." Thomas slumped, defeated. "Manderley paid me to plant evidence, said Thorne needed a scapegoat. But poisoning Clara? That wasn't part of the deal." Holmes scanned the room. Sketches of Viola littered the floor. Backstage, rehearsing, weeping. "You love her," he said softly. Tomas' defiance crumpled. "She didn't deserve Helena's cruelty. I tried to protect her." He handed Holmes a crumpled letter. "Meet me at the docks tonight. We will disappear." Viola's signature looped desperately at the bottom. As they left, Martin muttered, "Viola planned to flee." "Why?" Holmes stared at the Thames, its waves ink-black under the moon. Guilt, or fear of a puppeteer tightening the strings. At Baker Street, a telegram awaited. Clara Devereux had survived, the poison diluted. Holmes traced the vial's origin to an apothecary near the docks. The proprietor, a wizened man missing 2 fingers, identified Viola. She bought prussic acid a month ago. Returned last week, demanding a weaker dose. Martin frowned. 2 vials? One to kill Helena? Another to frame Clara? Holmes nodded. A daughter's vengeance became a pawn in a larger game. Viola sought to ruin her mother's legacy, not share the stage with rivals. He unfolded Tomas' sketches. One depicted Viola backstage, clutching a locket, a twin to Helena's famed diamond necklace. The pawned emerald necklace, Holmes recalled. Helena discarded it years ago. Viola kept its twin as a token of rejection. He stood abruptly. "We have overlooked the locket. It's not a trinket. It's a key." Dawn found them in Viola's dressing room, prying open the locket. Inside lay a slip of paper. St. Agnes Orphanage, 1878. St. Agnes Orphanage crouched at the edge of London like a gargoyle, its soot-stained bricks and barred windows exuding an air of forgotten sorrow. Sherlin Holmes rapped the brass knocker, its clang echoing through the hollow silence within. A gaunt woman, with a face like crumpled parchment, answered. her black habit frayed at the edges. "We are closed to visitors," she snapped, but Holmes pressed a sovereign into her palm. "Sister Agnes, I presume? We have come regarding a child placed here in 1878. The nun's eyes narrowed, but she ushered them into a parlor reeking of carbolic acid and boiled cabbage. Martin coughed discreetly as Holmes produced the locket. "Viola Croft, born Helena Margaret Voss. You raised her." Sister Agnes stiffened. "That name is forbidden here." The mother paid handsomely to ensure the girl never knew her true lineage. "Yet she discovered it," Holmes said. "How?" The nun's composure cracked. "A man came years ago, Dr. Quinn, demanded the adoption records, threatened to expose us unless we handed them over." She retrieved a ledger from a locked drawer, its pages brittle as moth wings. "Helena Voss," the entry read. "Monthly payments, £10. Condition: no contact." Martin traced the entries. She paid for 18 years, then stopped. "The girl aged out," Sister Agnes said coldly. "We sent her to a workhouse, but she returned once, screaming, clutching a playbill with Helena's face. We had to drag her away." Holmes studied a faded photograph in the ledger. A young Viola, her eyes burning with a fury that outshone the orphanage's drab backdrop. Where did she go after the workhouse? The streets, theaters. She had a voice, that one. Sang for scraps. The nun's voice softened, almost regretful. Said she would make her mother see her, even if it killed them both. As they departed, a ragged boy materialized from an alley, thrusting a note at Holmes. "The locket isn't the only twin. Find the other." The paper smelled of grease paint and rosewater. Viola's signature scent. Back at Baker Street, Holmes spread the orphanage records alongside Helena's letters. "2 lockets," he murmured. "Helena kept one, pawned the other." "But why?" Martin frowned. "A keepsake? Guilt?" "A key," Holmes corrected. "To a safety deposit box, perhaps." Helena's pawn ticket mentioned an emerald necklace. But what if the locket was the true collateral? He examined the pawnbroker's address, Hartnell's Sons, a notorious establishment in Whitechapel. The shop was a den of shadows, its shelves crammed with the carcasses of forsaken heirlooms. Mr. Hartnell, a skeletal man with milky eyes, squinted at the locket. Ah, yes, the actress pledged it in '85, redeemed it a year later. Holmes leaned in. Who redeemed it? Hartnell's grin revealed rotted teeth. A young woman, pretty but hollow-eyed, paid in cash. He slid a ledger entry toward them. V. Croft, 1886. Martin inhaled sharply. Viola had it all along. But why? Holmes' mind raced. The locket's twin Helena's would have been a perfect hiding place for secrets. Had Viola stolen it? He recalled the pawned emerald necklace, its absence in Helena's belongings. "A decoy," he muttered. Helena pawned the necklace to draw attention from the locket. Whatever it contained was worth killing for. They returned to the theater at midnight, slipping into Helena's sealed dressing room. Holmes pried open a loose floorboard beneath the vanity. Dust motes swirled as he lifted a velvet box. Inside lay Helena's locket, identical to Viola's. Its clasp resisted until Martin's penknife flicked it open. A tiny key tumbled out, stamped with the crest of Lloyd's Bank. "A safety deposit box," Holmes said. "Helena's final secret." As they exited, a figure lunged from the shadows. Tomas Rivera, wild-eyed, a palette knife glinting in his fist. "You will destroy her," he snarled. Holmes disarmed him with a swift jab, pinning him to the wall. "Viola is not yours to save," Holmes said coldly. "Where is she?" Tomas spat blood. "The docks. Midnight. But you're too late." The clock struck 11. The Thames hissed under a moonless sky, its waters ink-black and choked with fog. Sherlock Holmes and Martin sprinted toward the docks, the echoes of Tomas' warning, "You're too late," clawing at their heels. Warehouses loomed like sentinels, their shadows broken by the distant glow of a schooner's lanterns. A figure stood at the edge of Pier 12, her silhouette sharp against the haze. Viola Croft, clutching a leather satchel to her chest. Holmes slowed, his voice cutting through the damp air. "Running won't absolve you, Viola. Nor will it resurrect her." She turned, her face pale under a borrowed sailor's cap. "You think I wanted resurrection? I wanted her to acknowledge what she did." Her hand trembled as she unclasped the locket around her neck, the twin to Helena's, and flung it into the river. 17 years in workhouses and alleys while she bathed in adoration. She didn't even leave me a name. Martin edged closer. The poison. Why prussic acid? Viola's laugh was brittle. A quick death was mercy. I wanted her to feel the fear I did when Quinn showed me the adoption papers. The betrayal. She opened the satchel, revealing a stack of ledgers. But Manderley wanted it. Theatrical. Said her death should entertain. Holmes seized the ledgers. Pages detailed payments from the Théâtre Lumineux to Nigel Thorne, timed with Viola's hiring as understudy. "Manderley funded your revenge," he deduced, "in exchange for sabotaging Helena's theater." Viola nodded. "He promised me a lead role if I unsettled her. But when I confronted her with the locket, she laughed, said I'd never be more than a shadow." Her voice broke. The poison was for her drink, but Manderley's man switched Clara's prop too, to frame me, then silence me. A foghorn blared. The schooner's gangplank lowered, and Tomas Rivera emerged, a duffel slung over his shoulder. "Viola, come on!" he shouted. Holmes stepped forward. "You helped her poison Clara, diluted the dose to mimic her handiwork." Tomas glared. "To protect her. Manderley threatened to expose her if she didn't flee." Martin intercepted Tomas, grappling him to the dock as Holmes pressed Viola. The safety deposit box. What did Helena hide? Viola's smile was bleak. Proof she bribed critics to ruin Clara's career. Manderley craved it to control them both. She handed Holmes the key. "It's over. Let the world see her rot." But Holmes shook his head. "You forgot the lilies." Viola froze. "The turpentine on the notes, Tomas sent. You planted them to mislead us, but Manderley ordered Clara's poisoning to mirror Helena's, ensuring the blame fell on you." He motioned to the ledgers. "These implicate him, not you. You're not a murderer, Viola. You're a pawn." Sirens wailed in the distance. Manderley's carriage careened onto the pier, the impresario bellowing, "Seize her!" But constables swarmed behind him, summoned by a telegram Holmes had sent from Hartnell's shop. Manderley thrashed as they clamped irons on his wrists. "You have doomed your theater, Holmes," he spat. "No," Holmes said coldly. "You doomed yourself when you mistook vengeance for ambition." Viola sank to her knees, the satchel spilling its secrets into the fog. Tomas reached for her, but she whispered, "Let them take me. I am tired of hiding." As dawn bled across the harbor, Holmes opened Helena's safety deposit box. Inside lay a letter, yellowed with age. "To my child, I left you to protect you from this cursed life. Forgive me." Martin frowned. She regretted it. "Regret," Holmes said, "is a poor epitaph." He closed the box, its contents a silent requiem for a mother and daughter forever divided by the footlights. The gilt-edged corridors of Lloyd's Bank felt unnervingly sterile after the chaos of the docks. Sherlock Holmes slid Helena's safety deposit key across the mahogany counter, the clerk's spectacles glinting as he retrieved Box 2I-17. Inside lay a stack of letters bound in black ribbon, a will penned in Helena's looping script, and a small velvet pouch, heavy with uncut emeralds. Martin whistled low. She hid a fortune. Holmes untied the ribbon. Not a fortune. Bribes. The letters detailed payments to critics, judges, even a police inspector, all to silence scandals and secure Helena's stardom. Among them, a contract with Silas Manderley dated 5 years prior. In exchange for exclusive rights to a scandal in Versailles, Théâtre Lumineux will cease all slander against Helena Voss. Martin scowled. They were allies before rivals. What changed? Holmes' finger hovered over a name in the will. Bequeathed to Viola Croft, the contents of this box and my eternal remorse. Helena's conscience, he said quietly. Too little. Too late. A cough interrupted them. The bank manager, a nervous man with ink-stained cuffs, approached. A woman left this for you. He handed Holmes an envelope sealed with violet wax, Helena's trademark. Inside was a playbill for The Orphan's Lament. Its margins scrawled with frantic shorthand. He knows about the child. If I die, it's him. Helena feared someone before her death, Holmes said. Not Manderley, another player. Martin peered at the scribbles. Him. Maybe the benefactor who funded Viola's training. They traced the playbill to a shabby theater in Soho, its marquee advertising Macbeth, with a troupe of third-rate actors. The director, a cadaverous man named Alaric Poole, greeted them with a sneer. Helena Voss? She ruined me, stole my production, my patrons, left me to rot here. Holmes held up the playbill. You cast her in The Orphan's Lament. With a child extra named Viola, Poole's bravado faltered. She demanded the girl be in the show, paid me extra to keep it quiet. Martin flipped through a ledger. Payments from Helena stopped after the play closed. Why? Poole's laugh was bitter. She got what she wanted. The critics, praise. And I got a warning. A dead rat in my dressing room. Card said, silence is a virtue. The rat's description matched Manderley's tactics, but the timing puzzled Holmes. Helena had severed ties with Manderley years ago. Who else threatened Poole? As they exited, a newsboy's cry sliced through the fog. Second actress attacked! Clara Devereux missing! Holmes snatched the paper. Clara had vanished from her convalescent home, her bedclothes slashed to ribbons. A single lily lay on her pillow. They found Clara's maid hysterical in Mayfair. Men in masks took her. They left this. She thrust a note at Holmes. The Queen's reign ends at midnight. The paper reeked of turpentine and bergamot. A familiar cologne. Holmes froze. Thorne. Nigel Thorne, released on bail, had disappeared after Manderley's arrest. They combed his ramshackle flat near Drury Lane, finding a map of the Thames dotted with red X's. Martin traced the marks. Docks, warehouses, he is replicating Helena's death sites. Beneath the floorboards, they uncovered a shrine, playbills, Viola's stolen gloves, and a vial of prussic acid. He is unhinged, Martin muttered. But why target Clara? Holmes pocketed the vial. Thorne's career died with Helena. He blames Clara for surviving. A muffled sob echoed from the closet. Inside, bound and gagged, was Esme Lovelace, the reclusive playwright. Holmes freed her as she spat. Thorne is mad! He said Clara's final act would redeem him. She handed Holmes a torn ticket stub. Midnight. The Ruin. The Ruin was a derelict music hall on the city's outskirts, its roof half collapsed. They arrived as moonlight speared through shattered stained glass, illuminating Clara tied to a crumbling stage. Thorne stood over her, brandishing a prop goblet. The critics, darling, he sneered. You'll die as Helena did, authentically. Holmes stepped into the light. You're no playwright, Thorne. Your ending's trite." Thorne lunged, but Martin tackled him, the goblet shattering. Clara's bonds held a slip of paper. "Forgive me. V. Viola's plea." Or another forgery. As police dragged Thorne away, Holmes studied the paper. The ink was fresh, the handwriting too steady. Viola didn't write this. Someone wants her to take the blame. Again. At dawn, a telegram arrived at Baker Street. "Tomas Rivera, dead. Suicide, they say. Come at once." The morgue's chill clung to Holmes as he lifted the sheet. Tomas' wrists bore defensive wounds, his palms smeared with paint. Not turpentine. Prussian blue. A message. Holmes peeled back the corpse's collar. Around his neck hung a tiny brush, its bristles matted with blood. Etched into the handle, St. Agnes. The orphanage's secrets, it seemed, were not yet spent. The mortuary's flickering gas lamps cast jagged shadows over Tomas Rivera's corpse, his skin waxy under Holmes' scrutinizing gaze. The Prussian blue smeared across his palms had dried into a grotesque tapestry, each streak deliberate. Martin hovered near the door, unnerved by the silence. "Defensive wounds," Holmes murmured, lifting Tomas' hand, but no blood under his nails. He didn't fight his attacker. He painted this after death. The tiny brush around Tomas' neck bore the orphanage's name, its bristles stiff with coagulated blood. Holmes pocketed it, his mind churning. Prussian blue was a pigment reserved for artists, historians, and forgers. They returned to St. Agnes at midnight, the orphanage's windows boarded like closed eyes. Holmes picked the rusted lock, the scent of mildew and rot clawing at their throats. Sister Agnes' quarters lay untouched, her crucifix askew above a bed stripped bare. Martin pried open a loose floorboard, unearthing a ledger thicker than the one they had seen before. Its pages listed not adoptions, but sales. "Good God," Martin breathed. Viola Croft, £50 to Mr. E. Quinn, 1878. Dozens of entries followed. Children sold to blackmailers, sweatshops, brothels. Holmes' jaw tightened. The nun wasn't a guardian. She was a broker. A floorboard creaked overhead. Holmes stilled, then lunged up the staircase, Martin at his heels. The attic was a crypt of broken toys and moth-eaten uniforms. A figure crouched in the corner, backlit by a sliver of moon. A young woman in a paint-stained smock, her fingers clutching a palette knife. "Stay back!" she hissed. Holmes recognized her face from Tomas' sketches. "Leela, Viola's orphanage sister, sold to a forger's apprenticeship. You painted the notes," he said. "Turpentine, Prussian blue. Tomas taught you?" Lila's defiance wavered. "He protected me. Until she came back." "Viola." Lila spat. "She demanded the ledger, said she'd burn this place down, but Sister Agnes threatened her, said she would expose the poisonings unless Viola paid." She thrust a crumpled note at Holmes. "Midnight. The old mill. Bring the ledger, or he dies." The paper bore Viola's handwriting, or a flawless mimicry. The mill stood skeletal on the Thames's edge, its water wheel decayed to splinters. Inside, candlelight revealed Viola bound to a support beam, gagged. Sister Agnes circled her, a revolver glinting in her hand. "Ah, the detective," the nun sneered. "Here to mourn your failure?" Holmes stepped into the light. "You killed Tomas, forged the suicide to silence him." Sister Agnes' smile was feral. "He discovered my side business, selling brats to Manderley's brothels. Pious work, really. Cleaning the city's filth." Martin edged toward Viola, but the nun cocked the hammer. "The ledger, Mr. Holmes, or the girl joins her mother." Holmes tossed the ledger at her feet. As Sister Agnes bent to retrieve it, Leela lunged from the shadows, slashing the nun's wrist with her palette knife. The gun clattered away. Holmes subdued Sister Agnes, her habit tearing to reveal men's trousers and a money belt stuffed with sovereigns. Viola crumpled as Martin freed her. She forced me to write the notes. She choked. Said she'd kill Thomas if I didn't frame Manderley. Holmes studied her wrists, raw from ropes, but no trace of paint. You didn't poison Clara. Sister Agnes did, using Thomas' supplies. Lila nodded, tears streaking her face. Thomas refused to help her, so she made me forge the Lilies cards and his suicide. Dawn bled through the mill's cracks as constables hauled Sister Agnes away. Holmes handed Viola the ledger. "Burn it," she pleaded. "Let their names die with her." But Holmes tucked it into his coat. "Justice requires light, Miss Croft, even when it burns." At Baker Street, a parcel awaited, a Prussian blue portrait of Helena, her face half obscured by lilies. The note read, "For the detective who sees shadows." Martin frowned. "Lila." "A warning," Holmes said. "The brushstrokes are hers. Shall vanish now. Another ghost in Manderley's empire." He slid the ledger into his desk, its weight a promise. Some secrets, he knew, were primers for greater explosion. The gaslit streets of London curled like smoke around Sherlin Holmes as he strode toward the Théâtre Lumineux, the ledger burning a hole in his coat pocket. Inside, Silas Manderley's empire teetered on collapse. Actresses whispered in clusters, stagehands packed their tools, and the air thrummed with the brittle energy of a tomb awaiting its final seal. Holmes' target was not the theater, but the crypt beneath it. Manderley's private vault, rumored to hold darker secrets than poison. Martin lagged behind, clutching a police dossier. Manderley's ledgers match St. Agnes orphan sales. He didn't just fund Viola, he owned half the cast. Holmes paused at a poster for The Duchess's Folly, Clara Devereux's face, slashed with red ink. A empire built on bones. But who inherits it now? They descended into the vault, its iron door ajar. Inside, velvet curtains draped crumbling shelves of cash, jewels, and jars of unmarked powders. Holmes' lantern glinted on a photograph. Manderley and a young Helena Voss, their hands clasped over a contract. Martin squinted. They were partners? More than that. Holmes pried open a strongbox, its contents spilling out. Love letters, a lock of auburn hair, and a marriage certificate. Silas Manderley and Helena Voss, 1875. Martin recoiled. He was her husband, but Viola's birth certificate listed no father. Because Manderley demanded anonymity, Holmes said coldly. Helena's stardom relied on her being unattainable. A child would have ruined the illusion. He unfolded a letter, Helena's script frantic. "Silas, I won't hide her. She's ours." Beneath it, Manderley's reply, "Choose, the stage or the brat." The vault door slammed. A figure emerged from the shadows. Lila, her smock streaked with Prussian blue, a pistol steady in her hand. "You weren't meant to find that," she said. Holmes didn't flinch. Manderley's true heir, not Viola. "You—" Lila's smile was a knife's edge. "He took me from St. Agnes, trained me to forge, to become. But Helena's brat clawed her way into his theater. I had to remind him where loyalty lies." She motioned to the jars. "Prussic acid, his recipe. Sister Agnes sold the children. I sold the poison." Martin edged toward the exit. "You killed Thomas, framed Viola, all to please a father who'd never claim you." Lila's composure snapped. "He will. Once the world sees Viola hang for Helena's murder, he will need me." Her finger tightened on the trigger, but a cacophony erupted above. Screams, the thunder of collapsing scenery. Holmes lunged, disarming her as the vault shuddered. They spilled into the theater to find the stage ablaze, flames devouring the velvet curtains. Amid the chaos, Viola stood at the footlights, a lit match in her hand. "Let it burn," she whispered. "Let it all burn." Manderley staggered from the wings, his tailcoat singed. "Fool girl! This theater is your legacy!" Viola laughed, a sound like shattered glass. "You sold my mother. Sold me." "What legacy is that?" She hurled the match into the orchestra pit, flames surging toward the rafters. Holmes seized her arm. "This won't free you." "No," she said, tears cutting through the soot. "But it will bury them." As the roof groaned, Martin dragged Manderley toward the exit, the impresario howling curses. Leela vanished into the smoke, a phantom reclaiming her shadows. Holmes lingered, watching Viola. "You knew," she said, "about Manderley, about me. I knew a daughter's rage rarely dies alone." She pressed Helena's locket into his hand. "Give this to the orphans. Let them know let them know someone wanted them." The chandelier crashed, sparks erasing her silhouette. Outside, the Thames mirrored the inferno as the Théâtre Lumineux collapsed. In the ashes, Holmes unearthed a single unburned ledger page, a list of buyers, crowned by a name that made his blood frost: Mycroft. The game, it seemed, had never been confined to the stage. The Thames bore witness to the smoldering carcass of the Théâtre Lumineux, its once gilded domes now skeletal ribs clawing at a dawn-streaked sky. Sherlock Holmes stood amidst the ash and embers, his coat singed, eyes reflecting the dying flames. Martin coughed beside him, clutching the ledger page that bore the name Mycroft. A spectre from Holmes' past, now haunting the present. "The fire brigade claims it was arson," Martin said, voice hoarse. "Viola's doing." Holmes nodded absently, his mind stitching fragments. The orphanage ledgers, Manderley's vault, Leela's forgeries. A shadow moved in the ruins, a figure in a soot-stained dress, swaying like a wraith. Viola. She emerged from the smoke, Helena's locket glinting at her throat. "You found him, didn't you?" she whispered. "The man who pulled the strings." "Mycroft," Holmes said. "My brother." Viola's laugh was a broken thing. "Of course. The great detective's kin, trading in flesh and secrets. He funded Manderley's brothels, you know. Took a cut of every child sold." She extended a trembling hand, a key dangling from her fingers, the twin to Helena's safety deposit box. "See for yourself." Lloyd's Bank had opened its vaults at dawn. Box 217's twin, unlocked by Viola's key, revealed a stack of letters between Mycroft and Manderley, coldly transactional. Ensure the girl's compliance. Mycroft had written, "Or the orphanage burns." Martin's fists clenched. "Your own brother orchestrated this?" "Power is his opium," Holmes said flatly. "He cares not for the pawns, only the board." They found Mycroft at his Diogenes Club sanctum, ensconced in leather and arrogance. "Sentimentality, Sherlon?" Mycroft sneered, swirling brandy. "A defect I'd thought you cured of." Holmes slapped the ledger onto the table. "You trafficked children, financed murder." Mycroft's smile was glacial. "I stabilized empires. Manderley's theaters, Helena's fame, even your precious Viola, all thrived under my calculus." "At what cost?" "Balance?" Mycroft leaned forward, the club's silence a weapon. "Expose me, and the orphanages collapse, the theaters shutter, London burns. Walk away, and I ensure the guilty hang." Holmes' jaw tightened. "And Viola? A tragic figure. Let her flames cauterize this wound." Viola awaited them at Blackfriars Bridge, the locket's twin now clasped in Holmes' palm. Below, the Thames churned with secrets. "You have come to arrest me," she said. "No," Holmes replied, "to offer a choice." He revealed Mycroft's deal, silence in exchange for her freedom. Viola's eyes hardened. You would let him win? Justice is a mosaic, Holmes said. Shatter one tile, and the picture remains. She stepped onto the parapet, wind tangling her hair. Tell them I hated her. Until the end. Viola. Don't. Martin reached, but she was already falling, the locket flashing once before the river claimed her. Manderley hanged for arson and fraud. Sister Agnes perished in prison, throat slit by a debtor's blade. Lila vanished, her forgeries surfacing years later in Paris, a queen of the underworld. Mycroft's empire endured, untouchable, a cancer in velvet gloves. Holmes stood at Baker Street's window, Viola's locket weighing his desk. Martin entered, bearing a postcard. A Prussian blue lily, postmarked nowhere. Case closed? Martin asked. Never, Holmes murmured, the Thames whispering its endless dirge.